welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to Season 5, Episode 4 of Bell to Bell with Bobby Blaze. I am your host, Professor Jeremy Vilmer, and I am alone this week on Bell to Bell with Bobby Blaze. Bobby's having an issue with one of his eyes. He just couldn't see himself recording yesterday. But seriously, he's okay. He just needed some time to rest and get it under control. He will be back next week. Show must go on. So last week, the great sport of professional wrestling lost a legend, but it also lost a great supporter and a fan. Bullet Bob Armstrong passed away, as well as our own Tex Johnson. We'll get into Bob a little bit more here shortly. But to start off with, I wanted to talk about Tex. Tex got a hold of me early in the show's existence. Talked a couple times, and he designed a logo for us. And then he started providing me with episode art, for Twitter and for uploading with the episodes, things like that. A little bit after that, he asked about starting a YouTube page. And, man, he did some great things on there. He would take a short piece out of the show, like one of the numbers from the countdown. And then he would add, he'd edit it down to make it a little easier to follow, or a little friendlier for video. But then he'd add to it with additional, notes, subtitles, videos, extra sound clips that recontextualize or help to contextualize exactly what we were talking about. It really, really expanded on each one of those things. It was amazing the stuff he was doing. So, longtime listeners to Bell to Bell with Bobby Blaze will know I had a really shit year, 2018 rolling into 2019. My dad died, I lost my job, had a heart attack, and my wife left me. So for the following year, I did my best to, drink myself to death, I guess. I mean, I was drinking way too much. I guess I was trying to beat my dad to liver failure by 25 years. Because of that, very often when our recording days would hit, I just was not in the shape to record. Just too fucked up, too hungover, blah, blah, blah. And during this period of time, Tex offered to host, produce, and edit the show. He didn't know if he'd have time to do it, and we really never got around to discussing it more than once or twice, but he really just put it all out there. He's like, hey, here's what I'll do, here's what I can do, or here's what I can try to do. And I appreciate that. A hell of a loss. Everybody that met him loved this guy. If you look on Facebook, he had 10 billion friends. You talk to people that just met him once or twice at a wrestling show. Everybody loved him. Early on, he was getting bumpers for us by guys like Mick Foley and George South, and it just, the list goes on and on. It's going to be a loss. It's going to be felt. It's going to be noticed. So this episode we're dedicating to Tex, and we're going to talk a little bit about Bob Armstrong and a couple other things. But what I'm doing is we're going to do this kind of like a clip show. I went on YouTube, found a couple things that I'm going to pull off and put in here, and just, that some of them will have some additional sound to them, but you can kind of hear what Tex was doing with the YouTube page as much as you can tell what was going on YouTube from sound. I've got two pieces about Bullet Bob Armstrong that we did, one from our Greatest Regional Faces and one from our Masked Wrestlers episode. I've got a Paul Orndorff bit from the Legitimate Tough Guys episode because it is our most watched YouTube piece by more than 250,000 views. And then the other one I grabbed is Bobby versus Chris Benoit. I'd promised at one point, or I'd sworn, that I would never watch a Benoit match again. I made the exception for this match, and it really is that good. So I figured I'd throw this info in there. You can hear a little bit about, Bobby working at WCW, Mongo McMichael, and Chris Benoit. It's pretty good. But before we play those clips, let's do a little mail call here. I kind of went around and collected a couple messages real quick, just people, from the group, on Facebook saying goodbye to Tex. So the first one's from Rodney. It says, rest in peace, Tex Johnson, Godspeed. Rodney's been with us since real early on. So thank you, Rodney, for sending that in. Next is Nate, who we're going to hear another piece from right after this, but Nate from the Wide Man Can't Jump, podcast. And he says, Tex Johnson, what a class act. Miss you, brother. Hug Sheila tight, my friend. Tex's wife passed away late last year, early this year. So, the poor guy, at least they're together now. And then Joe from Facebook says, I became aware of Tex Johnson through the Bell to Bell podcast back in October. I watched every one of those videos. I only know him through through his work and Facebook. I enjoyed his posts and send prayers to his family. And Tex was a prolific Facebook writer. Tex was actually a prolific writer in a lot of ways. But, I could have grabbed more. Those are the first ones I grabbed and I put into the script for the show we were going to record. But I wanted to get them in this episode since we're doing, basically a tribute to Tex and Bullet Bob Armstrong here. Now, I'm going to play a voicemail from Nate. We're obviously not going to get around to answering it, but I wanted to go ahead and get it in here since he took the time to send it in. And then when Bobby is back in a week, we'll try to tackle it then, unless something unexpected happens, unless, a huge guest lands in our lap or something.
Yeah, I'd like to get a large number 4. Yeah, with fries, cheese. Yeah, and a drink. Yeah, large. Large diet. Oh, hey. Oh, okay. We're not at the drive-thru, but we are at the Bell to Bell with Bobby Blaze. What's up, guys? Linda, get back in there. We don't need none of that right now. Wanted to throw out a show suggestion for you guys. I know how much you guys love when we do that, right? What I'm thinking, though, is when you two guys get together, you always come up with these great top 10 lists. And you always come up with these great episodes. And I enjoy them. They help me on my weekly drives to and from work, school, wherever I'm going. Why not you guys tell the stories of what made you pro wrestling fans? What are your favorite matches? What are your favorite moments? What are those moments that stick out in your mind? What made you fall in love with the sport of pro wrestling? Love you guys. Thanks for all the support. Keep at it.
Bobby. Yes, number 8. Okay, so when I know personally, Bullet Bob Armstrong. He comes in at number 8. He was first of all, I have a lot of love and respect for the entire Armstrong family. Traveled a lot with them, worked a lot with them. Talked to Steve, I talked to Scott every once in a while still. I talked to Brian every once in a while still. Haven't spoken to Bullet for a while, but I like Bullet Bob Armstrong. He comes in, of course, he worked a lot with the throughout the southern U.S., down in Alabama, Georgia. He worked in Florida. He was in the Hall of Fame in 2011. But some of the things that I know personally, that's just something I just glanced up and read off. A couple things I want to share with you is I know he was a former United States Marine, so I thank Bullet Bob for serving our country. Also, Brian James, his youngest son, he also served as a Marine, and I appreciate that. But he was a fireman, and he started off as a fireman there around, I think, Cobb County, Marietta, Georgia. And he worked several years, maybe up to about 8 years before he was wrestling a lot and getting really, really popular. And I think he probably was a fireman for several years before he finally made that decision, I'm going to make it in wrestling, because he started telling me how over he started getting when he was going out, to these, to the areas down there in Georgia and Alabama and working. The other thing, 2 things that stood out that he told me about, if you're familiar with the Nautilus equipment, if you're familiar with Nautilus, Arthur Jones, who invented the Nautilus equipment, I think it was down in Florida. Bob Armstrong told me one time he went down there to purchase a piece of equipment. Of course, back in the day, those were expensive piece of equipment, but apparently he was buying a piece for his home gym. And Arthur Jones used to measure people's arms, and the way he would do it, he would take a tape measure, a piece of paper, and cut it out and wrap it around your arm and then mark it. And he said he had legitimately had 20-inch arms at one time, and it was verified by Arthur Jones because he was so impressed with people's arms. So Bob Armstrong at one time, Armstrong did have that. And a lot of people don't know that he went under the mask as a Bullet, and that was due to a weightlifting injury. He was lifting about a 180-pound dumbbell, I think it was, and it broke. And it required a lot of surgery on his face. A lot of people think he went under the hood, I guess, to become the Bullet, alter ego or whatever, but that wasn't the case. He was doing it to disguise rather some of the disfiguration from the accident of the weightlifting. And of course, most recently for me, and I know it's been a while, he's been on TNA, and of course, like I said, he's been in WWE Hall of Fame in 2011, but he was a Smoky Mountain Wrestling Commissioner, and he was just over as a baby face everywhere he went, man. I really, that's all just, from notes and from the heart on Bullet Bob. He deserves to be in the top 10 regional baby faces of all time. So he comes in at number 8, and I'll let you add whatever you'd like, Jeremy.
Oh, yeah.
Run away with that. But some of the people I know personally, and you've talked about this, you let me go because I might have a good behind the scenes story. So,
yeah, absolutely.
Just a good dude. Good dude.
I've just got a few notes about Bullet Bob. Obviously, I had that he wrestled under the name Bullet, under a hood after having his face injured. He kept the name Bullet after that point. He also feuded with the Stud Stable. So there's to our Fuller Welch friends right there.
Yes.
And, of course, his 4 legendary sons. The Armstrong name is synonymous with pro wrestling in a lot of areas. Even though Road Dogg is probably the most famous and he didn't wrestle under that name, but everybody knows.
Finally settle something once and for all and see who is the baddest of the bunch.
Let's go to number 6, and you got it here as the Bullet, but it's obviously Bob Armstrong. So,
oh, it is?
They're going for the mask. They're going for the mask. They're going for the mask. Wait a minute. Wait a minute. Let's go to black. Let's cut away. Well, I'm sorry. I never should have called for that. I got so carried away.
We did it, good son. Everybody says it's all fair. Everybody knows it's all over.
Well, we got it. I'm terribly sorry, gentlemen, but at the moment that happened, we seem to have had a technical problem.
What?
And I don't.
What are you talking about? Everybody's been. You got it on tape.
No, I'm sorry. We had a technical problem. We had to go to black.
What are you talking about? You had to go.
Bullet. You heard it. The people heard it. Technical difficulty. Nobody sees nothing.
Hallelujah. I told you before, somebody up there likes me.
Yeah, the Bullet, man. Bullet Bob Armstrong. Yeah, a lot of people think that he started that gimmick just to start the gimmick, but actually came after a weightlifting incident.
Thing called, funny enough, nose breakers. And you do triceps. The bench flipped. When the bench flipped, that 180 caught him right here and ripped his nose off. We took him, they went to the hospital. We go to the hospital, check on him, and they're frantically searching for his nose. Yeah, we went back and found it at the gym. It was over the corner in some dust, a big hunk of meat in the gym.
It wasn't worth saving, though.
No, it was nasty.
The dumbbell crushed the side of his face, and he had to have a lot of reconstructive surgery.
I might look a little different to some of you people because on the 13th of January of this year, every bone in my face was broken. 250 pounds of steel crushed it. My jaws were wired together. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't talk. I had to breathe through a tube through my throat. And when you get that close to death, you do a lot of thinking. When you're staring at the ceiling, can't speak a word to anybody, you think about the good things and the bad things that have happened during your life. It took close to a month for plastic surgeons to put all the bones back in place, and while they were working on me, one thing stood out in my mind that I'm very unhappy with. 2 years ago, I did something that I'm really very sad about. I believe in my heart I cost the Tennessee Stud the world title. I also busted his leg.
And even after recovering from the surgery, thankfully, because he's a great performer and a really good man, Bob Armstrong, he would donate from time to time, bringing it out when he needed to. And he started a lot of feuds, mostly in the South. You know, he started with the Stud Stable and Continental. He used it on Georgia Championship. He used it, throughout Georgia, Carolinas, mostly down south, like I said. But Bullet, man, when I got to work with him, he was the commissioner of Smoky Mountain Wrestling. And I think they built it up over 18 months between him and Cornette. The build-up was there. And, finally they had that. So that was in the, early 90s there. And, of course, at some point, after the commissioner Bullet Armstrong against the loudmouth manager Jimmy Cornette, once that built so high and they actually got to, the bullying point of it, it's time for a good friend of Bob's named Bullet has to show up. Bob was just a really, really good worker, or the Bullet was, I should say, both of them were. And I always liked him under that hood, man. He would have that hood on And, he was an Armstrong. He had the big arms, but he didn't have big legs. And I heard him in an interview one time say, you never seen a thoroughbred with fat legs, So, but he had his singlet on, and he'd stand back behind that curtain, and they'd come out the bad to the bone at the time. And he'd be standing there, and he'd get them legs going. And he was a little bit older when I met him, of course, but he'd have that mask on. He had a great body. Went to the gym with him several times down in Georgia when I was down that way. Used to work out sometimes. He done his own thing. I'd be with Steve or Scott. We'd do our own thing, Brad was on a whole nother level as far as working out goes. But, Scott and Steve, we did our own things. But Bullet, hey, he was intense. He did his own thing. But, that curtain, back to that Jody spot, if you will, he'd be standing right there, and that music would hit, man. And he'd have that mask and that body, and he'd start moving that foot. It is almost like, using the presence of Elvis or something, the way he'd get that leg going, And, man, when the time was right, he'd bust through that curtain, and I don't know if he went anywhere he didn't get a pop, because everyone knew the Bullet was over when he come out, So that's my memories of the Bullet, and that's why I have him at number 6.
Yeah, and I want to just point out, when Cody Rhodes comes to the ring, he's got that video package that says, wrestling has more than one royal family. The Armstrongs are a sadly overlooked family in the lineage of wrestling royal families. That guy created a dynasty of wrestling professionals.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it just, I always want to take the time to take a quick aside and say, the rest of us need to remember the Armstrongs. The North remembers.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, I've been watching a lot of Game of Thrones.
That's okay. That's cool, man. No, I tell you, the Armstrong has always been good to me, and I always been good to them too. That's just the way it works. But I could tell you some of the Armstrong stories. It's not even funny, but one of that was funny was Brad. Had all the talent in the world, and he was still working at WCW when Road Dogg was still performing back in WWF at the time. And I was on vacation. I was working for WCW. I was on vacation, and I was listening to Howard Stern, and Road Dogg and Billy Gunn were on the show, and someone called in and said something about Brad being a jobber and Brian having all the talent in the world. Well, Brian didn't take too kindly to that. And he said, let me tell you something. And he went on a big rant, but basically what it amounted to, he said, my brother Brad has more talent than all of us put together on one finger. He goddamn has more talent than you. And he said, I'll tell you, and he just buried this collar, but it's true, man. Brad has so much talent, Bullet had so much talent. They all had so much talent. Sometimes, and Brian just, was just defending his whole family basically. But, and Brian had that great run. Of course, Scotty's a booker and an agent there now, and they both work there as agents, and that's great, but yeah, Bullet, man, that Armstrong family, what a great group of guys right there, man.
Make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss an update.
Was there anybody that was equal to me as far as talent, being aggressive, being vicious, or any of these things? It would have to be a person that possibly played college football, or even pro football, that had that intensity, that had that will to win. Maybe somebody that might have been an Army Ranger or in the Navy SEALs. It would have to be somebody of that caliber to even tickle my feathers. Everybody else was it was just another walk in the park. But I liked a good, tough match, and I only had a couple of them in my 25 years of wrestling, and both of them were against myself.
This guy here was actually one of the first heels I ever cheered for, because he was the first really nasty double cross I saw when he clotheslined Hulk Hogan at the end of a tag match, and then gave him a pile driver. And that's Mr. Wonderful Paul Orndorff.
They ended up carrying him out in a stretcher after I pile drove him. And I would say from that time on, and that was, I like that, because I like hurting people to start with. And doing that for him, and just to teach him a lesson, a lesson that his mom and daddy should have done a long time ago, and I had to do it.
he's built more like a fucking truck than he is a human being. And even when he was getting on in his career and had a semi-atrophied arm and was wearing flip-flops, he still took a fight to Leon White and got the better piece of the stick in that deal, which is saying something.
I see Paul, and I'm coming down the hallway, and this was at center stage. In the back of center stage, the stairs in the back of the hallway, you could see them go like this, and they had these big wooden boxes that they had production stuff in. Paul says, "Get out there, you gotta get out there now," and Vader went like that, and Paul turned, and he bear-pawed him. Boom, in the face, and grabbed Paul as Paul was going down and front face locked and shoved him in the box. Well, I know Paul Orndorff forever, before he was a wrestler. And as they pulled him aside, everybody wanted to hold Paul back. I said, let them straighten this thing out. Paul went over with his bad arm and hit him right on the chin.
And it was nothing. It was that weak right hand. And he hit me a second time, hit me a third time.
I love you. I hope you live another 50 years. I'm praying for you. But when he says that the bad arm hit him and didn't hurt him, when Leon White came out of that room, his face looked like it exploded.
I drug him down with me. And Paul, some of the wrestlers helped Paul up. And he kicked me once or twice before I got up.
Vader fell on his knees, and Paul field goaled him right on the chin. And his head actually touched his heels, okay? Now everybody's mulling around. They push Paul into one of the dressing rooms. Vader, I gotta give him credit. He came in and said, let's go.
I remember that, and I got up and grabbed him, and we went into the coach's room, fighting like a wrestling type fight. But that was it.
And Ming stepped in and said, no, nothing's gonna happen. And both of them.
Ming came up behind me and said, Leon, that's enough, you're going to hurt him. And at that point, I didn't want to mess with Ming, because that would have been a mistake, I think.
I'm not saying that Leon's not a tough guy. I'm not saying that he doesn't remember it the exact way it happened, because memory is a funny thing, you know? You like to remember different things different ways.
He had boots on. And I don't know why that matters, but I guess if you're barefoot and slippers on, it's harder to fight somebody, right?
No. He was wearing flip-flops.
He was.
Okay.
He was wearing flip-flops.
And shitty fucking 99-cent with the where your toe gimmick has just that ball that comes through. I mean, not flip-flops. I'm talking shitty 99-cent shower shoes.
And he dropped them.
Like twice.
But it was, I'm late, so what's he doing with slippers on? He's an agent. He's got his boots on.
Paul field goaled him, but if he had cowboy boots on,
it would have been over.
It would have been over. It was over anyway.
Yeah.
I mean, his face was all swelled up.
I mean, and then the next day, how Paul had beat me up, and what they're seeing is those 3 hits to the face, and I mean, it was like my 12-year-old son hitting me in the face.
There was, Orndorff must have got him right in the right place. His whole face, not only his nose and his cheeks, his whole face looked like it exploded. You ever see like the gray and black bins that they would put like ice in, put water in so that you could, he threw all the water out of one of those bins. It was just ice and melted ice. Held his breath probably for about 15 minutes and would go under, you know, to try to get the swelling to go down. So, Leon, I love you, but when you said he didn't hurt you, your face looked like it exploded. I'm sorry. That's just the truth. I was asked to tell you the true story, and that is the true story as I've seen it.
You know, stop right there. You know what? Paul has made a living talking about this night. And one of the things he says, and you know what? I understand Paul's sick. I guess he's got throat cancer, is that right?
Yeah.
So, you know, it's hard to say this, but, you know, I was there that night.
I mean, I don't know what else there is to say other than he got his ass whipped, and if that's what you want to hear, fine. If he thinks he won, that's fine. I don't really care. I don't care. It don't matter.
I liked the fact that the next day he went on national TV and he said to talk about toughness, because he pretty much just broke character and just said toughness is that he gave an interview and he just said, but that's when you take an 800-pound gorilla and you just punch him in the face and you knock him on his ass. And he was just that Mr. Wonderful doing a shoot type interview, because that had just happened, I guess, the day before or what have you. But man, I tell you, Paul Orndorff, I had heard that name when I first moved down to Florida so many times, because he was known as the Brandon Bull. He was such a hell of a football player and wrestler in high school, and he played for the University of Tampa, the Bulls, I think they were. And he was just a bull of a man. He was a man built like a boy, or a young boy, an 18-year-old built like a fucking man back in the day. And I'd always heard legitimate, stories about Paul. Don't fuck with Paul, And if you want to check some of these guys, there's a couple of YouTube videos out there. I guess Tony Atlas does an interview. I can't remember, as Tommy Rich. I don't know what he admits to and doesn't.
Later 80s and 90s kind of a blur to me, man.
When they come up this way, I guess Tony ran his mouth a couple times, and Paul just said, hey, pull the car over.
Oh, man, it was Orndorff, Atlas, because I used to travel with Tony Atlas. But anyway, I guess there were three guys in the car. There was a disagreement, and Orndorff and Atlas pulled over on the side of the road and was going to fight it out. And they got into it, and Paul bit part of Tony Atlas's ear off. And Tony missed a couple of shots for it. And I think Watts fined him for missing the shots because Paul had bitten his ear off. And that's just the way it was back in the day.
Legitimate badass, man. That's just not someone and I say this, when you talked about doing the pile driver too, when Hogan, but I mentioned it in my top 10, we did our top 10 moves and holds in pro wrestling, and we had the pile driver at the top of the list. Paul Orndorff had one of the, and I know we're talking, shoot fighting and street fighting, this and that, and you probably, not going to get a guy in a position in the street for a pile driver, but man, he had one of the best pile drivers in all professional wrestling, man. It was just, he had that jumping pile driver.
Yeah, his looked like it would break your neck.
Nowadays, if you talk to a wrestler, if they do an interview with him, the first thing that come up is, what's your gimmick? Or you're this gimmick. Well, that's what was so unique and different about me. First of all, I didn't have a gimmick. The gimmick I had was me. That is truly me, the way I acted, the intensity, to be ferocious, to be aggressive. When a guy's down, I'd kick him harder.
A year had passed, and I remember walking in with one of the Armstrong brothers, and Norman Smiley was behind me. Norman said, Bobby, I remember this arena. This is the same place you and Benoit had that killer match at last year. He said, y'all tore the house down. And I said, you remember that? And he said, I always remember all the good matches, the best matches off each show. And I took it as such a compliment from Norman to tell me that. What had happened, I had wrestled, we did the World War III, the pay-per-view. Then we went to do the TV. Of course, you had Nitro on Monday, and then we had TV on Tuesday. And I was completely unaware of this at the time. I was in the locker room just getting ready, just like anyone else. And Chris Benoit came, and he said, Bobby, come here. And he said, you're working with me tonight. He just locked up with me, and we started going at it, almost like a shoot, professionally, right there, just standing like right where I was dressing. We didn't move 2 feet. And he said, this is the way we're going to work, blah, blah, blah. And I knew something different was about him. I didn't know what it was at the time. And he said, you think about some things you can do, and I'll think about some things I want to do, and I'll get back to you. He said, but we're going to go out there and we're going to have a hell of a match tonight. And he walked away. And I thought, I wonder what that was about. And I remember Dean Malenko, and I think it was Jericho. I could be wrong on that. I know Dean was there because he said, hey, I thought you guys were going to shoot right here in the locker room. What was that about? And I just kind of blew it off. I was like, I don't know. And I didn't know. And then about 15 minutes later, he came back and he said, here's what we're going to do. How do you feel about this? How do you feel about that? And we didn't have everything planned out to a T, nothing like that. He hated that kind of stuff. We called most of it on the fly. But he just said, whatever you do, he said, I want you to work as hard as you can. I want you to work stiff. He said, I'm going to throw these knees. And he said, when I bend you over about a hair, this is about the only thing he honestly told me. So when I bend you over about a hair, put your hands over your face because I'm throwing knees. And that was about it, honestly. And, of course, I knew the finish. And Big Dusty, if you haven't heard his episode, that's episode, I think, number 4. Go back and listen to it on our podcast. But Big Dusty puts the match over huge on the mothership, WTBS there back in the day.
Bobby Blaze is a young guy that wants to get to that pay window. He has a tremendous amount of ability, and watching him right now, you know what I mean?
But I didn't know anything that had taken place, and what had actually taken place was Mongo McMichael was part of Horsemen then, if you recall, during that time period, and my name was on the board, apparently, that I hadn't seen yet, to wrestle Mongo, and Mongo thought that I couldn't keep up with him, and that I was beneath him, and that he shouldn't have to wrestle a guy like me. Now, I knew what my job was there. I knew I was about mid-card at best. I knew when I was going to get wins, and I knew when I was going to get losses pretty much ahead of time, weeks, sometimes days, but usually I knew. And I was fine with that because I was doing what I loved doing. There's 24 matches on the card. They shoot 12, they take a break, and they shoot another 12. And that's your next 24 matches. That's your next 2 weeks of TV on TBS. We were number 23 on the card. Scott Hall was the main event. I don't remember who he wrestled, but I know this. I tore the fucking house down. We had one of my top 5 matches of all time, and that's one of the things we did this list, my top 10 matches. I know of what I like as a fan and as a wrestler, but one of my favorite matches and best matches was against Chris, and this was one of them. Thus, a year later, Norman still remembering it being the best one. What had happened was, and I know you have a question about Mongo, so I'll let you get that out there, and then I'll go from there what I know. Because at this point, I knew nothing, okay?
Well, I just, how many times did Mongo McMichaels use a Northern Light suplex?
Did he use it once? I don't know.
I doubt it.
Did he know what it was?
What I'm trying to say is Mongo, and I'm not talking for you, I don't know that Mongo could wrestle his way out of a wet bag. But, that's just between you and me. I think it takes some nerve for that musclehead, chihuahua carrying lunatic to say you don't have the talent. But whatever, whatever. I was not a fan. I was not a fan.
Here's the thing. Mongo played 15 years in FL, okay? And I saw him back someone down, a pretty badass guy in the locker room one time with just a few words. Now, he had the advantage, and the other guy didn't even get up. So you don't play 15 years in NFL and not be a badass.
Oh,
so
I'm not saying he's not a badass.
I'm defending myself in this situation, okay?
Yeah.
I'm not saying I didn't respect the fact that I knew he was a badass, okay?
Yeah.
So, and I'm probably glad and probably better off and probably survived the stiff mat with Chris versus going out there with Mongo and trying to pull off something, even though he thinks he can't keep up with me. Because here's what happened. Apparently it was, Chris, Dean, Mongo, Arn, Flair, whoever, there, probably Bischoff or maybe not Bischoff, in the thing and in the war room, if you will, Terry Taylor or whoever, before the board went out and that comment was made. Well, Chris took personal offense to that, and I didn't know that had happened at the time. Nor did I know after he come and talked to me and what happened. And I was traveling with the Armstrong brothers at the time. We were staying up in Detroit because, like I said, we'd done the World War III. We had a Saginaw, Michigan next day, and then, like I said, we was in Toledo for the TVs. Scott Armstrong had went up to Chris Benoit and said something, which, again, I didn't know this at the time. He said, "Hey, man, this guy you're working tonight, he can work pretty well."
That's the fall. That's the tower fall.
And Chris said, "Hey, I was in Australia with him. I know he can work. That's why I'm working him. Don't worry about it," and walked away. And I guess he was a little bit stewed at Scott, not stewed, but, just a little bit hot because Chris knew who I was.
Yeah.
We go out there, we have the match, we tear it down, work stiff. It was good. I didn't know any of that until after the fact. That went all through Chris's body and mind that Mongo said that in front of those guys, and every one of them other guys had respected me, And Chris had known that, and he said, put my name with them. I'll wrestle them. And with all due respect, we did. We worked it, and I had even talked to Mongo several times about football, little things. I had Dick Butkus's book at one time.
Long before America had Hulk Hogan, the NFL had Dick Butkus.
I just picked it up at the airport, and it had a picture of Dick Butkus's knees really, really messed up. And I was joking with Mongo. I said, are your knees just fucked up or worse? And he said, they may not look that bad, but they're probably just as bad. I mean, just little things like that, you know. So, and not on that particular day. But I will say this. After that match, there was just a few of the boys. Like I said, it's match number 23 out of 24 on the show. I was unlacing my boots, and I kid you not, Mongo McMichael, and this is why I'm not going to bury the guy, because I buried him that day. He walked up, I was unlacing my boots, and he come around a corner, and I was sitting there, and he goes, hey, Bobby, and he reached his hand out. Now, I didn't know that he was the one scheduled to wrestle me, still, okay? He said, hey, Bobby, and he put his hand out, shook it, he goes, man, hey, kid, I didn't know you could wrestle like that, man. I didn't know you could go like that. He said, that was one hell of a match. I just want to personally compliment you. You just had a hell of a match. He didn't come back here and say, hey, by the way, I was scheduled to wrestle you and this and that. He just came back and he took the time to say what he said. And that was pretty much word for word what he said. You know, I didn't know you could go like that. Man, that was a hell of a match. And maybe one day, you know, you and I can have a chance to have a match like that. And that's what he said, you know.
Yeah, what I'd like to put out there at this time or any time going forward, if one of our listeners has a favorite Steve Mongo McMichael match, please tell me what it is.
Yeah, yeah, put it out there. Hit the hashtag BBBB.
So this week was a little bit emptier show than usual. But I promise we'll be much fuller in the next few weeks, you know, next week or two, actually. You can bet we have some great things planned, a surprise or two coming up, and we don't welch on our bets here. So, for myself, Professor Jeremy Vilmer, for Bobby Blaze and Tex Johnson, bye-bye, everybody.
Bell to Bell with Bobby Blaze and the Professor Jeremy Vilmer. Co-starring Tex in the Boiler Room, baby. Bobby Blaze, he is the man. Went toe-to-toe with Dan Severn. The Professor's here, he's never wrong. Once spent 6 months sleeping on a futon. Bobby Blaze, he's been around. Just ask the swingers in his hometown. He's always happy, but he don't know why. Was once billed as Kendo the Samurai. Pin me! Pay me! Oh yeah, we got Bobby and Jeremy, and somewhere down in the boiler room we got Tex. They're getting things done, bringing you some quality podcasting. Download it now. Do yourself a favor, do it now. You can find them at anchor.fm/bell-to-bell-blaze. Support them, leave them a message, give them a few bucks. Do it now. Bell to Bell with Bobby Blaze. Top 10s that will amaze. Just two buddies shooting the shit. But when you're done, you'll know that they're legit. Oh, Bobby, Jeremy and Tex. What a trio. What a combination. You do not want to miss this podcast. Download it. Do it now, I'm telling you. Don't If you don't believe me, ask some other people. They'll tell you. Check them out on Twitter. Check them out on Facebook. That's anchor.fm/bell-to-bell-blaze. They'll blow your mind, trust me. Purple Haze, you're going to need some because it's going to get crazy. You're going to love it. Bobby swears a lot. Jeremy shakes his head. Tex laughs. Although there's days we don't know where Tex is because he gets lost in the boiler room. But anyhow, enjoy it. Go there. Be there. Have some fun. Take an hour out of your day. You're going to love it. Trust me. I wouldn't steer you wrong. Bell to bell with Bobby Blaze.